has their fair share. But again, we're indeed delighted to have you here and participate in the Fellows, the Washington Fellows Program for Young African Leaders. It's a flagship program. I understand, I learned a lot about this when I started researching it, that you guys are kind of sponsored by the White House and the State Department. Very impressive, right? So that's a very big deal. And I hear the program is to further the empowerment of African leaders through academic coursework, leadership training, engaged learning, and networking. So again, at UPS here, we're very honored to be a part of that. I also understand that in order to get into the program, you have to have professional experience, right? And have been a leader out in your communities and various endeavors, right? Is that part of the requirement? So that's also quite impressive. Now here's the big thing that I did hear about your group. Now I hear that it's pretty tough to get into this group. I hear over 50,000 people apply, and they only take 500. Is that right? I don't know if I'd have made the cut. Wow, 50,000 plus, right? And then you only take 500. That's you're a pretty elite group. So, as I was talking to a couple of ladies over here earlier, you guys are the best of the best, right? You got to come on and say, hey, yeah, we are. All right. So we'd also like to take a moment to thank Clark Atlanta for hosting you guys while you're here in Atlanta visiting us here at UPS. You know, Clark Atlanta, you know, I've got my dad's twin sister went to Clark Atlanta way back in the 50s. And she still brags about Clark Atlanta today. She actually went to Clark Atlanta and was very excited about that. Went on to Columbia, then to Meharry, then ultimately University of Houston. And she had a great career as a nursing PhD, but I think her proudest moment always comes back to Clark Atlanta. So I want to thank the folks from Clark Atlanta for the work that they're doing and certainly hosting you guys while you visit us here at UPS. The goal of the program today is twofold. First is to give you an overview of UPS from our humble beginnings in Seattle, Washington back in 1907 to our current global leadership position as a logistics provider to over 220 countries. Also in that, we're going to talk a lot about what our 400,000 employees are doing for us around the world. And certainly Africa plays a big part of that as well. You'll have a presentation later today on the emerging market strategy that we're talking about. And Africa is really important to UPS, not only today, but in the future years to come. So you'll get a big, deep dive into what we're doing in emerging markets a little bit later today, but you'll be very interested in how important Africa is to us. So it's a big part of what we do today. It's going to be an even bigger part of what we do in the future. So we're very excited about that. You know, talked about what our 400,000 people are doing. But before we get into the formal program, let's just give you a few interesting UPS stats. So first off, I mentioned we're in over 220 countries, and we're trying to grow that every day. We're looking at more emerging markets. We have about 435,000 employees, which is about 81,000 are international, and 435,000 or so, 354,000 are in the domestic U.S. And we deliver about 18 million packages a day, and we get somewhere around 60 million hits on our website every day. So pretty big company, pretty busy, and we're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish in our 108-year history. Well, those are certainly some impressive facts. None of it happens without, you know, great people. And again, you'll hear that throughout the presentations today. Our theme will be a lot about what our people are doing for us. That's the kind of company we are. We take great pride in the people. We try to recruit the right talent and retain the right talent. So it's a big part of our strategy. So as you listen to those presentations today, remember the great work that's being done around the world. And as you hear all of these things, wouldn't happen without those people. So topics for today, just so you know what we're going to talk about. The history and the evolution of UPS. UPS's global logistics and solutions in action. You're also going to hear from our public affairs group, which will be very interesting, the work that they do in Washington, D.C. and around the world to try to set policy and help us in that area. You're also going to get a great presentation on our Orion technology. And this technology, I believe, I'm not sure if Chuck's going to do it or not, but if Chuck Collin comes, he's going to talk about how it really helps our operations become more efficient. And at the same time, we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint. So we're trying to have less emissions, you know, make the world a greener place. We're obviously a company that operates a lot of vehicles, and we've got to do our fair share in that area as well. Then we'll talk about the emerging markets, and that's where you get a deep dive into what's going on in Africa. And Africa is so vast and so impressive and so massive. There's so much to be done there, and I know you guys are a big part of making it happen. You are the leaders there, but we certainly would like to get in there and play a bigger role as well. Then you'll hear from the UPS Foundation. They'll talk about the humanitarian efforts that they're putting forward. And then, of course, they'll talk a little bit about our digital strategy, which I think will be interesting as well as the world goes digital. And you guys are probably all very connected, you know, with at least 2 to 3 or 4 devices and all of that throughout how you do your business today in the world. And then the last topic will be the UPS global commitment to sustainability, and we'll talk about how we're really trying to reduce our carbon footprint and make sure that we save this great planet that we live on. So thank you again for visiting UPS today. We're certainly honored to have you here. And again, I'm Myron Williams. I'm easy to find around here at UPS. mxwilliams@ups.com. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to assist you in any area. So thank you very much. Have a great meeting.
Thank you, Myron. So our next speaker is going to be Jill Sawicki. Jill is going to give you a brief history. Myron touched on a few elements, but Jill happens to work on my team, and Jill is our resident archivist. She knows more about UPS history. In fact, we joke if Jill ever decided to leave UPS, all her history would walk out the door. We have, she's got an office up here on one of the floors, but also down in the basement. She spends most of the time archiving and making sure all the content over the last 108 years is accessible. And as Myron touched on, us being a very people-driven organization, our history is a big part of our culture. And so we reflect on that. And we often talk about principles that were set up early in our company's history that still live today 108 years. You have to change because technology and business and the world changes, but there are some core cultural things that are important to us that were set up by our founders that are part of our brand. And so Jill's going to come in here and just give you a little bit about UPS for those that may not know about us. Okay, Jill.
Okay, I'm not used to driving this one, so. Which one?
The laptop or the keyboard that's underneath. Jill, you see that?
Oh, okay.
It's right there.
Thank you.
The toggle.
Aha, there we go. Okay, so as has been mentioned before, we do have 108 years of history. So we did start with these two gentlemen here. Better? Okay. Sorry, I'm not used to microphones either. So these two gentlemen started the company in Seattle, Washington. We started as a telephone messenger service. So I know that's a little odd to think about nowadays when you have a phone in your pocket at all times. But back then you would have had to be very, very well off to have a telephone in your home. So they started up that messenger service. And so when we originally started, there were 2 phone lines that came in, and you can kind of see the telephones there. These 4 gentlemen are considered to be our founders of UPS. So you did see the 2 original founders. On the left is Everett McCabe. He came in 1913, and he brought with him a lot of sales experience. He also helped out with a lot of our employee publications and what we now think of as employee relations. The next guy over is going to be Charlie Soderstrom. He came in 1917, and when he came in, he actually had been working with the fleet of one of the department stores, and so he brought a huge amount of automotive knowledge, and he also helped us bring in the color brown. Prior to Charlie coming along, we had 1 red vehicle was our very first vehicle. All the other ones were then yellow, which is a little loud. And Charlie came in and talked about doing something a little more subtle, a little more elegant, and that's how we ended up with brown. So Jim Casey was our primary founder. He and Claude started the company back in 1907. And he pretty much stayed with the company until shortly before he passed away in 1983. So he has been a huge influence on our company, and a lot of the policies that we've talked about and that Ron mentioned actually go back to Jim. George Casey joined the company in 1911, and he actually helped out a lot with our training, and he ran the West Coast when everyone else moved to the East Coast in 1930. So, what a messenger. So this is how we started out. So you can see these are the advertisements that we would place around Seattle. And the best service and lowest rates tagline, actually, periodically you'll still hear us talking about those kinds of things, especially the best service part. So we have had a couple of different logos over the years. Well, we did start with the first logo in 1919. You'll see the eagle there, and then it says Safe, Swift, and Sure. So that was when we were doing retail deliveries, and so we wanted to make sure that people understood that we were taking care of their packages and getting them there as quickly as possible. In 1937, we had shifted over to being more of a department store retail delivery. So that's where the stores of quality comes in. So back then, department stores were where you went for just about everything. So you know, everything from what you wore to your canned goods to your furniture. So we did want to highlight the fact that that was the vast majority of our business.
So Jill, it's interesting, so that's when we talk about the evolution, you'll see it, and it rapidly changes as we get further into the century, but it was a messenger, phone lines. So you have a message taken in via the phone line, we would dispatch it to someone on a bike, they would get on the bike and deliver that to the house. And then of course what happened was through that we started to roll from bikes, and you'll see old number one, and we started, the automobile became more popular. And it's interesting, what we'll touch on is then we moved into department store deliveries. So we went to, those that are familiar, one of the bigger ones is Nordstrom's, which is based up in the Pacific Northwest, was one of our customers. And so we went and started to convince the department stores that they would give us their packages and we would deliver them to everyone. And then really post-World War II is when there was this huge economic growth that led to what we would call the business-to-business delivery, which is a lot of what we do. And that led to the big expansion of UPS in the US. In fact, Jill may touch on this, we didn't even deliver every state in the US until what, mid-70s?
1986.
1986, was it Texas?
Texas was 86.
So I mean, we were still growing up until the mid-80s to get rights within the United States. And then what's interesting is gone kind of full circle is not only our expansion into logistics, and you'll hear all about that, but through package, but now we see the e-commerce boom all over the world, which has really gotten us back to some of our roots about delivering more retail packages to the home, where today still a lot of our business is B2B. So we've kind of evolved. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but our beginnings were really just a bike messenger company.
So the third shield that you see on there is designed by Paul Rand, who designed a lot of famous brands. And we went to this one. The package on top kind of significant for the small package delivery that we were mainly focused on at that point in time. So here you can see some of the different vehicles we've used over the years. So as Ron mentioned, we did start mostly on foot and then went to bicycles, then went to motorcycles. The one on the far left you can see there is actually early electric vehicles, which we were doing at least as far back as 1930 and probably prior to that as well. Here you can see what our 50th anniversary vehicles would have looked like back in 1957. The one on the far, your right, would be package car number 1, which we will see in the lobby a little later. Vehicles. Pretty much in 1916, we began making them all brown. So again, I had mentioned that we were going with a more elegant color because of course in this time you were doing the retail deliveries, the department store deliveries, and for them to give up the advertising of a vehicle coming up to someone's home with their name on it, we decided that something much more subtle than yellow, which is what we had been using at that point, would be appropriate. So now appearance has always been an important part of our company. So again, going back to the subtle, the elegant, our drivers were told that they would look good all the time. So you can see there in the middle, they actually lined up early in the morning. Part of that was to make sure that they all looked good. Part of it was to convey information. On the left side of the screen, you can see us washing our vehicles. At one point in time, we washed our vehicles every single night. Now, as you might imagine, during droughts and things, that became a little more challenging, so a lot of times we were innovative and did dust cloths and things like that. So over here, you can see a gentleman in front of a mirror, and in fact, you can still find mirrors like that in our facilities. Basically, it says smile, shave, tie straight. Back in those days, they would have worn bow ties. So those appearance guidelines are not just for our outwardly facing, our drivers that you see every day in our vehicles, but also our facilities and all of our management as well. So, reinventing business. So Ron had mentioned this, as things change. So when we started as a telephone messenger service, not very many people had telephones in their home. So it was a good service for us to provide. As technology caught up with us and people started getting their own telephones, we did have to shift over to retail deliveries. Now, initially those were your small shops, and then eventually into the department stores. Over here you can see furniture delivery. So we did furniture delivery well into the 1970s. And with our freight, we now do it again. So over here you can see some of our freight as well. Expansion. Again, Ron talked about this. So when we first started in Seattle, Washington, that was one facility. Then when we moved into Oakland, California in 1919, which you can see a little further down the coast, that was basically like a separate company. All of these ran independently. So if you look at the far left map, I believe that's like 1945. So we were pretty much all along the major cities on the West Coast. In 1930, we moved into New York City. So while the Depression was hurting a lot of people, we actually used the Depression to help sell our services. Because our main customer was a department store, they want to sell you things. They don't want to have to worry about delivering it. Back then, you wouldn't have had a car, so delivery was the way to go. So we went in and we said, hey, we'll help you focus on your core business, and we'll take over those things in the delivery end. So drivers, vehicles, insurance, licenses, unions, we took over all of that. And so we actually expanded during the Depression and through World War II. And this photo on the far left is actually showing you just